Hello, everybody. What is up, and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and if this is your first time stumbling upon my podcast, I used to have this in podcast form, but unfortunately, I can't access that. So here is the brand new Untold Crimes with Liz Austin, or Untold Crimes with Liz, or if you're following along over on YouTube, it is Crimes Untold with Liz Austin, or just Crimes Untold. Today, we're going to be talking about the Other Side Lounge bombing in the Centennial Park bombing and the other bombings that happened within Georgia by the domestic terrorist of Eric Rudolph. So, domestic terrorist Robert Rudolph planted pipe bombs in multiple locations between 1996 and 1998, and he also killed 2 people and injured well over 100 others. So, he injured well over 100 others when it comes to his multiple bombings. So, in future retrospect, after he was caught as a part of his plea bargain, he agreed to life without parole instead of the death penalty, and he is currently at the ADX Florence Supermax prison. If you have never read about this Supermax prison, this I don't know why I have such like a love for this prison, but I do. Let me just this Supermax prison is meant for people to be in their cell for 23 hours a day. They're only allowed out for 1 hour a day. There is a specific amount of people at this prison. Their cells are 80 square feet. Your sink and toilet are 2 in 1, and everything is made out of cement. You're there to reflect on what you did, not to enjoy prison or jail like other people do. You're there to actually be rehabilitated. I absolutely love this prison. It's in Colorado. Anywho, so Eric Rudolph is criminally responsible for the Centennial Olympic Park bombings, the Other Side Lounge bombings, the Sandy Springs abortion clinic bombings of January 16th, 1997, and the Birmingham abortion clinic bombings of January 29th, 1998. These all were done with pipe bombs that contained nails, which would penetrate post-explosion, kind of like shrapnel. So as soon as the bomb would go off, all these nails would kind of explode out, and that's how it hit multiple people. So another thing to note, like to notice about this man is that he was a part of the Christian identity crisis movement, of which can also be connected to multiple different domestic terrorist assaults other than the ones that he committed, which gives Christians a bad name, unfortunately. If you are a Christian, if you're religious, don't take this to heart. This is a specific identity crisis that leans more towards terroristic thoughts and ideology, not regular, well, also religious beliefs, but not to affect you. This is a specific group of people. So those of whom who are identified having a social relationship or ties to this group are Gordon Call, part of the order, Phineas Priesthood, Byron de la Beckwith, who murdered Medgar Evans. That story always resonates with me. And Chevie Kehoe. Chevie Kehoe, I actually covered on my channel, my actual YouTube channel. If you're watching this, that just sounds kind of bizarre, but if you're listening to it, that's why I said it like that. I covered him on my channel, and he actually was friends with Israel Keys, who's another serial killer. So if you have never put two and two together, those two are thick as thieves together. And they remind me of Eric Rudolph. All right, so the first of his crimes we're going to be discussing is the Centennial Park bombings, which happened on the 27th of July of 1996. So he made 2 anonymous calls about bombs detonating, and this was prior to them actually going off. And these anonymous calls obviously were made to the law enforcement agency or 911. So at around midnight, Rudolph planted an Alice pack, which is a military field pack, with 3 pipe bombs under a bench that was near the concert sound tower. And he planted bombs as bystanders watched the 1996 Summer Olympics, because this is where the Olympics were going to be held that year. There's a like an ulterior motive to it, but He would leave the scene and start his mission, that he believed he was relayed to him by the voice of God, hence where the Christian identity crisis falls into play with this. So this bombing would kill one woman and injure over 100 others. And this woman was there with her daughter, if I'm not mistaken. Alice Hawthorne, who was 44, she was killed in the explosion when a nail actually went through her skull, and the rest of the nails ended up like going through her body, as she was standing with her 14-year-old daughter, who was also badly injured as well. Alice was just there to watch the Olympics, and the there's a video of this explosion. That this video was captured from a distance away by Robert Gee, who's actually a tourist there. And this video would air on CNN. The sound of the explosion was also recorded by news crews from the ARD network, which is a German public television network. And they were interviewing Janet Evans, who's an American swimmer, at a nearby hotel. This is when they caught the explosion, the noise of the explosion, which is really crazy. The actual first person to report on this explosion was an Italian reporter. His name is Ezio Luzzi. Is Ezio Luzzi? Hopefully I'm saying that right. It's Ezioluzzi. And he gave a live news report about this. He was a correspondent for Radio Televisione Italiana for the games as they were taking place at that time. So the person that actually discovered the bag of the bombs was a security guard. His name is Richard Jewell. He discovered the bag underneath the bench, and he then alerted the GBI, which is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And at the time, Tom Davis from the GBI, he called in the bomb squad that included the ATF and the FBI to come and look into this bag. This bag was leaning against the NBC sound tower. So like I said, it was planted near the sound tower, and the sound tower was about 40 feet tall. So this man, Richard Jewell, and some other security guards, they began clearing the area almost immediately so that the bomb squad could come in and look at this package. Within 3 minutes, this is when the bomb detonated, and this was within 3 minutes of evacuating the area before all of the people could leave. He tried to get them out so quick, but the bomb went off. And it would be unfortunate for Richard Jewell because even though he tried to do something really good, he's the one that discovered the bomb. He was the one that the GBI, the FBI, and the bomb squad would look into as the one of their person of interest. He was never arrested, but his home was searched. They looked through his background. They would literally smear him all over social media because they thought that he was the one that wanted to. Basically, how it comes out for me is him finding the bag of the bombs, as kind of like a hero complex of him trying to save people, but yet they think he's the one that planted it, but he wanted to be like found via heroism, as like some people get off on things like this when they commit crimes where they're like, oh my God, I'm a hero, but yet I'm the one that's actually causing it. There's a lot of like nurses and doctors that kill people that try to kill people and they save them, or like, yeah, it's a weird, bizarre fetish that some killers have, and basically they thought that he was the one that was behind all this, but he wasn't. So Richard Jewell, he would be like literally demolished publicly by these investigators that were looking into him. And it was within 4 days after they ended up making a loan profile, or there was a loan profile made by the FBI, and Jewell was basically like, looked just like this profile. Jewell would end up having some defamation lawsuits against NBC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and some other media because of the way that they would reflect on how they thought he was the one that was doing this when he really wasn't. And some of the cases with this, the defamation cases, they would be settled, but they wouldn't be settled for about 15 years after because of all the litigation that it went through, the Court of Appeals. Ultimately, some of these cases would rest in July of 2012. And it was so basically he sued them for defamation because they all reported that he was the key suspect in the bombings. But he was the one that found these bombs, and he's the one that pointed out all these potential issues and holes in their cases. Unfortunately, Richard Jewell died in 2007, way before these cases would settle in court because he died due to severe health issues that stemmed from his diabetes. There is a lot of kind of like public media that is based on this case, Manhunt, which is a TV series. Specifically, season 2 is all about Richard Jewell, or like based on Richard Jewell. If you've never watched it, I highly recommend it. So, obviously, this bombing, the Centennial Park bombing was a way to help stop the Olympics. It was a way to stop the viewing of the Olympics to affect those that are watching the Olympics. What I do want to say is the bomb that they found in this would tie to the bomb that was found at Sandy Springs and the Other Side Lounge. And the reason I say this is because within the Alice pack, the pack had a direct charge to it, and it could have done more damage than it did, but it had moved a little bit, and that's why it didn't do as much damage as it was intended to do. There was a steel plate on a part of the directional device of it. This bomb also had nitroglycerin dynamite in it. Everything that was on the bomb was propelled by the nitroglycerin in it. It had the steel plates, it had the alarm clock for the specific detonation, and it also was contained by Rubbermaid containers. Rubber, so the plastic and the rubber in the container is a good conduit for everything to be held within and then to explode outwards. Because what happens if you heat something in a Rubbermaid container in the microwave? The heat gets too much and then it literally pops off the top. Basically, that's kind of, if you think about it, that's virtually what could have happened is all of that heat within, once that alarm clock goes off, all of that internal heat from the dynamite and the nitroglycerin, basically it propels it outwards. If you're not watching this, you can't see how my hands are moving, but basically like you can see it, like visualize it in front of you, how it will propel outwards. It's really disturbing and kind of gross, but um just to kind of circle back a little bit, one of the 911 calls that happened that was placed 18 minutes prior to the bomb detonating, it said that it was voiced by a white male that had an American accent, an indistinguishable American accent. So clearly, thoroughly somebody from the US. And this 911 call would be noted and sent to David Johnson, who was an FBI agent that received it. Kind of strange. And also within this 911 call, the person that called said that the bomb would go off within 30 minutes. So we have a call that happened 18 minutes before it was detonated and that the bomb would go off within 30 minutes. Hopefully there was some fast reaction time. Also, this bomb went off at 1:20 a.m. So, back on January 16th of 1997 at around 9:30 a.m. at 275 Carpenter Drive in northeast Sandy Springs, Georgia, which is like near Atlanta, there was a bomb that detonated outside of the Family Planning Services Center, the Atlanta Northside Family Planning Services Center. This was one of two attacks at this location that happened. So there was two bombs. The second bomb detonated near the building after first responders came to the scene, which was specifically to target the first responders. This happened about 45 minutes after the first explosion. So the first explosion itself didn't cause any death or anything. It did blow a hole in the wall, but the second bombing is the one that indeed, in hope, was to hurt those that would respond to the scene. So the bomb in this obviously had nitroglycerin. Consisted of 10 to 20 sticks of commercial grade dynamite, had steel plates to direct the propulsion of the explosion, and it had square cut masonry nails, or like concrete masonry nails or flooring nails in it. That's what would act as shrapnel. And it was wired in a way to a Big Ben clock, a wind-up clock. And it would be packed in a military style ammunition can, which is really scary because I actually have one of those underneath my bed and I use it as a storage container. Highly terrifying. I don't want to think about it. But it's in green metal military style ammo can. That's what these bombs were made of. So this is attack number 2 by Eric Rudolph, specifically at a abortion clinic. And this clinic would be a target because of his belief of anti-abortion. It's really sad because, abortion's there for a reason. I'm not going to go into that because that's not what this episode is about. This episode is about the crimes that Eric Rudolph committed as a domestic terrorist. And it's also would be known after our next bombing we're going to talk about that he is a part of a group called the Army of God, which I'll kind of get into a little bit within that. So the Other Side Lounge was a nightclub that was actually located on Piedmont Road in Atlanta, Georgia. So this was a nightclub that would primarily be a gathering place for lesbians and other members of the LGBTQIA plus community. At the time, it would be the LGBT community because this happened back in 1997. So back on February 21st of 1997, this is when a pipe bomb would explode at the lounge, and it would damage the building and it would destroy several cars in the parking lot. This happened at around 9:45 p.m. So thankfully, nobody died, but there was 5 people that were injured, 1 critically injured. So this bombing would be attack number 3 for Eric Rudolph, and he targeted this nightclub due to how strongly he felt against the gay rights movement. So during this time, the gay rights movement was very prevalent within basically the entire world, but more or less the United States, because people a part of the LGBT community didn't have as many rights as others. And there was a lot of turmoil when it came to the rights that people deserved. And he, being a part of the Army of God, had a really strong disposition against what was happening. Basically, I'm going to say this in a way that's not really nice, but he didn't like the way that people were shoving their agendas down his throat, and he wanted to fight back against it. That sounds really rude and really disgusting and disturbing of me to say, but it's true. Oftentimes, when people fight back like that, it's because they don't like how people are shoving their agendas down their throat. Anywho, that's besides the point. So, the bomb was located on the outdoor patio of the nightclub when it exploded. There was a lot of people inside of the bar that thought a woman actually had been shot, but then they realized that this woman wasn't shot by a gun. She was shot by a nail from a bomb that had gone through her arm. And several people were hit by these nails that came out of this bomb. There was at least 100 people at the club at the time of the incident. This building was damaged so severely, it's horrifying. There was also a second bomb that was found inside of a backpack that was hidden in some bushes in the parking lot, and this would be discovered after the police arrived, after the first explosion happened. The bomb squad ended up using one of those bomb robots that you see in like movies and stuff to detonate the second bomb, which would leave an indent, like a crater in the parking lot. Basically, if you think about it, kind of like what happens on Monsters Inc. when they find the 2319 piece of clothing, the sock, and they like bolt the dome around the sock and they detonate it. Think about that. Um, as a cute little like analogy. You're welcome. And they thought that the second bomb was going to be a more massive explosion than the first bomb. That's why they wanted to detonate it and like take care of it right away. So there was only one person that was severely injured, and she would be taken to Grady Memorial Hospital, where would be treated for her injuries and she would recover. She where she was hit in her brachial artery. Her brachial artery is in her upper arm, so the woman that they thought was shot by a gun. And this artery basically it's one of your main arteries, and that's why it was so severe. It severed this artery, and she would end up speaking post what happened that she almost bled to death, which is true. And she and four other people were injured, but she had the most effect from the injuries. So on the morning of the 23rd of February, this is when the GBI would end up having a conference about these bombings. And this is when it would come out that they believe the bombings at the abortion clinic in Sandy Springs and the Centennial Park bombings were all done in a similar way. This is when they started piecing them together, that they were all a part of the same bombing kind of like tour, if you will. That sounds really bad. But this would be spoken about by Agent Woody Johnson, and he was from the Atlanta FBI office in Georgia, so basically the Georgia Federal Bureau of Investigation office. And he was the one that cited that these bombs had been placed at the scene around the same time, would detonate like around the same time apart from one another within it's basically within 30 minutes, or like 10 to 30 minutes within one another. This is when these bombs would go off. So, you know what I mean? They were timed out in a way that it would hurt everybody, but it would make the impact that this person wanted. So the mayor of Atlanta at the time, Bill Campbell, and the director of the ATF, which is the Atlanta director of the ATF, Jack Killeran, they both would talk about how they feared for future attacks from this serial bomber, because what has already happened is already detrimental. If you add more bombing attacks to it, wow, it's just going to get even worse. And subsequently, there would be a tape that would like tape this whole street was blocked off. They didn't want anybody going down it. And 2 days after this news conference is when they would remove the tape and they would reopen this street to the traffic. Like they were terrified. And some of the cars that were affected by this bombing were left in the parking lot. So you could see all of the aftermath. And it's really, really sad that one of the victims that was involved in this, she actually lost her job because of this bombing. I don't know why she lost her job. I would assume it's because she needed to take time off because she was affected by this, but it's really disgusting that somebody would lose their job after being a part of a domestic terrorist event like this. So following this bombing, there was a lot of letters that would come into the NBC Atlanta office, and one of the letters was sent by the Army of God, which is an anti-abortion Christian terrorist group. Ooh, as a Christian, this stuff like this gives me a bad name. I do not affiliate myself with any of this. Disclaimer, I do not affiliate myself with the Army of God. Just to break it down for you, according to the DOJ and Department of Homeland Security, the Army of God is a American Christian terrorist organization. and the members have perpetrated anti-abortion violence. The Army of God was formed in 1982, and they share ideology and tactics that are one with taking the life from those who would kill babies. There, I said it. Gross. So the earliest accounts of anything terroristic happening with this group is three men stating they were part of the Army of God, and they ended up kidnapping this doctor. His name is Hector Zevallos, and he would perform abortions, and they also would kidnap his wife, Rosalie Jean, and they would hold them hostage. They then would be released about 8 days later, and the Army of God would claim responsibility and all this jazz and all this jazz. These three men would also um, claim responsibility for bombings that happened at several different abortion clinics in DC, Virginia, and Maryland that happened in 1985. I also looked into those, and that is crazy. Just so you're aware, the Army of God is crazy. They also, the Army of God also were the ones that would mail letters with white powder in them to over 280 abortion clinics in 2001. And in the letters, this is when it claimed it was anthrax. You remember when the anthrax attacks were happening and all that jazz? Yeah, they have part of that. This group is a global terroristic group. It's crazy. Anywho, we're gonna get away from them because they ultimately terrify me. So we're gonna kind of talk about them, but not. So they claimed that they were the ones behind the bombings at the lounge, which is very scary. There was a voicemail left by the Sons of Confederate Clan, which is a LA-based group, left at a gay community establishment on the 22nd of February, where they claimed that they were responsible for the bombing attacks, and they weren't. There also was not any comments being released by the FBI at this time when it comes to these different claims of different groups taking credit for these. On the 10th of June that year, there would be a press conference held where they would talk about how they believed that the clinic, the nightclub, and the park bombing were all done by the same person, which is true. Very true. It was all done by the same person. The Sons of Confederate Clan were a farce. Eric Rudolph is a part of the Army of God, but a lot of these people that tried to say that they were the ones that did it, they weren't the ones that did it. So yeah, they can step off at this point. So at around 7:33 a.m. on the 29th of January of 1998, this is when a bomb would explode outside of a abortion clinic in Birmingham. So this bomb would be hidden within a flower pot, and it was detonated via remote control. This is the first one that would be detonated by a remote control, not by a clock. So this bomb would explode just a few feet from where the front door of this clinic is. And this clinic would be at 1117th South Street. Let me retry that again. This clinic is at 1117th Street South, and it would leave a giant hole in the ground, in the lawn in front of the clinic. So this is where the second person that Eric Rudolph killed would die. This officer that died, his name is Robert Sanderson, or he'd go by Sandy. He was only 34. He actually was there for his moonlighting job, which is being a security guard at the all-woman health care clinic. There also was a nurse. Her name is Emily Lyons. She was severely injured, but she survived. So Sanderson ended up dying on the scene. This scene was complete chaos. There was hundreds of local people like flooding the area. They were so scared. They had no idea what happened. All they know is that here's a security guard. They're dead. This nurse is injured. Oh my goodness. What are we gonna do? So, yes. This would instill so much fear in the people in the area, and they didn't know whether or not there was going to be a secondary device. So obviously the authorities were called, and they didn't find a secondary device. So this is the first bombing that was perpetrated by Eric Rudolph where they did not find a secondary bomb, which is kind of weird. But this is when Rudolph would become a suspect. This witness that was eating at the McDonald's saw him getting in the truck. The tag or the license plate number would be given to the police, and the truck was then found to be registered by Eric Rudolph. And this is when the manhunt started, like initially started. This witness ended up, his name came out as Jermaine Hughes, who was a UAB pre-med student at the time, and he ended up going to Harvard Law School in the future. Good for you, man. Good for you. Jermaine Hughes ended up looking for help along with Opelika lawyer Jeff Tickle, and they're the ones that actually wrote down the license plate number. And Tickle wrote down the license plate number on a coffee cup, and then Hughes wrote it down on an envelope that he actually had in his car, which is really cool that they were able to write these down. But if they didn't, I think there would have been a lot more bombings that happened subsequently. Thankfully, they were able to catch this, well, eventually catch this man. They wouldn't catch him for a little while, but because this bombing happened in 1998, and unfortunately, Rudolph wouldn't be taken into custody until 2003. So, as of May 5th of 1998, which would be 5 months, almost 5 months after the Birmingham bombings, this is when Eric Rudolph would be placed on the 10 most wanted fugitives through the FBI. He also has his aliases of Bob Rudolph, Robert Randolph, Bob Rudolph. Oh, sorry, Bob Randolph was the first one. Whoopsies. Eric Rudolph and Eric R. Rudolph. Also, there's two regular pictures in a sketch of him. The artist rendition happened in July of 1998, where he has a ponytail. It's clear as day he has a ponytail and he has a beard. I bet you all want to know how he was got, huh? I bet you all want to know. So, let's start off in May, which is when he was put on the FBI's most wanted list. Rudolph would be charged for the Birmingham bombing, and he was wanted in connection to the Atlanta bombings. He was wanted for questioning. By December of that year, they would run forensics on the Atlanta bombings, and he would be further charged with those bombings as well, because basically what they did forensics wise is they deemed that these bombs were all similar, which is good that they did that, but they already knew that they were similar. Sometimes when I read these things, it's like, really, you had to do forensics in order to basically trace that these were the same. If they're built the same way, they detonate the same way, they are the same. If they are built the same way, they are probably built by the same person. I know that sounds really sarcastic of me, but it's very true. Because he had already carried out these four bombings, and they knew that he was using 11 and a half or yeah, 11.5 inch cut flooring nails, or like 1 and 1/2. Yeah, 1 and 1/2. Why do I keep saying 11.5? 1 and 1/2 inch flooring nails in concrete nails. This is what's used as shrapnel. No wonder why that lady's artery was severed. Um, and they all came from the same batch. That's how they figured out they were the same. And these nails were found in a storage unit that was rented by Eric Rudolph that was all the way in North Carolina. So this type of nail had a unique tool mark on it, and when they the machine marks to those on compared these machine marks to a nail that was left, like a nail mark that was left on a bullet when it was fired, basically when it was fired from a gun. The day that these witnesses saw Rudolph, it was like the luckiest day that they were able to find this. They were able to witness him getting into his truck. They were able to get his license plate. Like, that was the luckiest day for anybody, because if they never watched his truck or watched him leave the woods or see his license plate, I don't think he would have been caught for years. He probably would still be on the loose right now. So, within the next few months, years, they would end up going to Rudolph's house in North Carolina. They would end up spending the next 5 years, including millions of dollars, to search and find him, who was completely elusive. You got to think about this. Rudolph is a part of the Army of God. He's also very similar to Chevie Kehoe. Chevie Kehoe was on the run for a while. Same thing with Israel Keys. They were on the run for a long time. If you're a part of a terroristic community like that, you're going to be really like involved in have quite a knowledge of how to elude people and how to get away from people. So you have to keep that mindset in there that they know exactly how to not get caught, which is exactly what he did. He didn't get caught for years. After he started on the run, about 6 months after, Eric Rudolph would then write a list of supplies that he needs, and he would give it to this local dude, and this local dude would get him all this stuff. And about 2 days after he gave this dude his list, he would go pick up the stuff. This is when Rudolph would end up stealing this dude's truck, gave him $500 for the supplies. This man, his name is George Nordman, he would end up waiting about 2 days after this happened to then notify the police about what happened. His truck, Nordman's truck, would be found on July 13th of 1998, and there would be a note inside of it, or basically like talking about who the owner of the truck is and asking for the truck to be returned back to George Nordman, and this was in Eric Rudolph's handwriting. How sweet of him, right? Gosh, people like this annoy the crap out of me. Anywho, so as they searched for him, they obviously they knew he was alive. They knew he was alive. He was just laying in wait. It wouldn't surprise me if he had planned other bombings while he was still in hiding, but you never know. Sometimes people like this, bombers like this, you never know what's going to tickle their fancy or what they're going to want to do when they are on the run like this. He had a giant flashlight strapped to his body in the early hours of May 31st of 2003, and he was near a dumpster at a Save-A-Lot. There's a police officer. His name is Jeff Postal. He was 21 at the time. He ended up seeing something that was really like bizarre, and it's like, what's going on? It's something out of place. So he ends up shutting off his lights and he circles around the Save-A-Lot parking lot. And this is when he sees a dude at a dumpster. Eric Rudolph was going through the dumpster. He's dumpster diving for food because he's hungry. This is when Officer Postal, ends up disarming Rudolph, and he calls for backup. This man, this 21-year-old, caught this bomber. I give him so much credit. So obviously Rudolph gave him a fake name, but Postal knew that something was different. So he ended up taking him in, all this jazz. Once he's at the police station, this is when a Tennessee Valley officer holds up the FBI's most wanted poster of Eric Rudolph and literally demands him to confess who he is. So Eric Rudolph then says, "I'm Eric Rudolph. You got me." How I can't stand when they're caught in like the most ridiculously stupid ways. He was just dumpster diving and he got caught. What? It's the most bizarre and odd ways that these people are caught, and it literally like it irritates my brain. I don't know why, but it does. Um it just it hurts. It irks my brain. I don't like it. All right, to give you a little background on Mr. Rudolph, Mr. Eric Rudolph, he was born in Merritt Island, Florida, back in September 19th of 1966. Yeah, he's an old man now. He's 57. So his occupation by trade, he was a roofer, a handyman, and a carpenter, hence why he was used to using these nails. He knew a lot about them. Well, he would end up living with his mother and his siblings after his dad died in 1981, and they would move to Nantahala, North Carolina. It's in western North Carolina. If I said that wrong, apologies. I don't mean to offend anybody. So he would end up dropping out of high school after he attended the Nantahala School, which is like, the public schools or whatever. After he attended ninth grade, he would drop out that year. And he would end up working as a carpenter with his older brother Daniel. After he was 18, he would spend time with his mom at a compound in Missouri, which is known as the Church of Israel, because his mom would identify as that of being a part of the Christian identity crisis, or she would be Christian identity, a part of that embodiment group, all of that jazz, what I briefly discussed earlier. Yeah, he would then go there. And after doing this, he then would pursue his GED. He would go into the Army. He would end up going to Fort Benning for his basic training. He ultimately would be discharged from the Army due to his usage of marijuana back in January of 1989. And this is when he was serving at Fort Campbell in Kentucky with the 101st. It's so hard to say their airborne divisions, but the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell. That same year, before his discharge, he ended up going to the Air Assault School in Fort Campbell, and he ended up getting the rank of Specialist, or E4. I'm not part of the military, so I don't really understand it. All I know is that when you are considered a specialist, it's part of like the ranks or whatever, and the E4 is a type of pay grade or whatever. So once your rank changes or whatever, there's specific ranks. There's the like junior enlistment ranks. In the Army, you have private V2, private first class, whatever, and then I think it's specialist, and then he's a part of the pay grade of E4. There's 8 pay grades from what I read about, and he would be like right in the middle. Following this is when he would join the different supremacist groups that he would linger in prior to committing these bombings. So, flash forward, he then would, commit bombings, and after he would be arrested, he would release a statement on April 13th of 2005. This is when he would talk about what his motive would be for the bombing. So, he said it was political. For the Olympic Games that would happen in Atlanta, he wanted to basically murder these people due to socialistic ideologies. He believed that corporations were spending billions of dollars on these games, even though technically the idea of the games itself, or the concept of the games, or the Olympic movement, is to promote global socialism, bringing everybody together. In retrospect, he thought that the purpose of these games was being misconstrued, so he ended up thinking that these games were an embarrassment for the government, and it was an embarrassment to further give like proof of basically publicizing or putting things in the media that shouldn't happen, like abortion, being gay. The things that he didn't like is what he thought was being like forced down other people's throats. And his plan of these bombings was to force the cancellation of the games, or to create a state of chaos or insecurity that would empty the streets. That way, nobody could reap the benefits of having all these people there. And that didn't happen. After he released this statement, he then would confess to the other 3 bombings: the abortion clinic, the Sandy Springs abortion clinic, the Other Side Lounge, and then also the abortion clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, and in which this would also then tie him to the murders that he would be involved with, the one at the Centennial Park, the Olympic Games, and then the murder of the police officer at the clinic in Birmingham. So he was first identified as being a suspect back on February 14th of 1998, following the 2 tips that I already talked about. He was officially named a suspect in the other bombings on October 14th of 1998. He then obviously would be arrested May 31st of 2003 at around 4 a.m. He would officially be charged on October 14th of 2003 with other crimes. He was initially defended by one attorney. His name is Richard S. Jaffe, or Jaffe, and This attorney then would withdraw, and then he would be represented by Judy Clark. In April of 2005, the DOJ would announce that Eric Rudolph would agree to a plea bargain. And under this plea bargain, he would plead guilty to all charges that he would be accused of in order to avoid the death penalty. So this deal was confirmed by the FBI after what he told them they would find at basically in the woods of North Carolina. So he revealed that he was hiding dynamite in certain areas and where they could find it. They ended up finding about 250 pounds of dynamite in the different woods in North Carolina, and then they accepted the plea bargain. He also made these pleas in person in the different courts in Birmingham and in Atlanta on April 13th, just so you're aware. He then would release a statement that would explain his actions, saying that he said these bombings served as a way for anti-gay and anti-abortion terrorism. He also said that he wanted to deprive the government of the goal of killing him or sentencing him to death. And the fact that he ended up agreeing with the government was a tactical choice on his behalf, and it in no way legitimizes the morality of the government to judge him or to accept his guilt. Bro, you took a plea bargain because you're a pansy. You should have just gotten the death penalty. I wouldn't if I was, in that, which is I can't stand when people do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to rationalize my decision, my thoughts, because this is my podcast. If I was in that predicament, if I was one of those officers, I never would have given him a plea bargain. Nope, I never would have given him agreement. He should have gone to court. They should have had a trial. They should have executed this man. He has also tried to vacate part of his sentence, and he's completely unsuccessful. And like I mentioned earlier in this, he's at the ADX Supermax federal prison, which is in Colorado. And like I mentioned, he spends 23 hours a day alone in his 80 square foot concrete cell. He's in concrete. He cannot get out of jail because he received 2 consecutive life sentences in exchange for his plea agreement. 2 consecutive life sentences without parole for the murder of the woman and the police officer. He was sentenced to this on July 18th of 2005. He's fucked for life. He can't get out. So post his bombings, there would be a lot that would come out about the Christian identity crisis, the Army of God, and the Anti-Defamation League, and all of this. And a lot of them would talk about how they, specifically about the Christian identity movement, there was a person, his name is Daniel Gaiman. Daniel Gaiman would come out and say that he was born Catholic and hopes that with forgiveness that he could also die as one after he had, a specific relationship with Rudolph and with the Army of God. That some of these people do end up leaving, and they repent for their sins, and they repent for the misjustices that they end up going through or help with while they're a part of these groups, when others are still brainwashed to a sense. If you follow that, they're still brainwashed and they're still stuck in that ideology. Some of them will become born again Christians. Some of them will need to rid themselves in a deeper way to find salvation. This has definitely affected a lot of people when it comes to Christianity and religion in itself, because a lot of people do still take into consideration that not every religious person is a good person, which is true. Not every religious person is a good person. Not every non-religious person is a good person. So we also have to take that into consideration. Rudolph would also write a book about what he did. He would also say that just because he's an inmate, it doesn't mean he lost his freedom of speech. His book is called Between the Lines of Drift, The Memoirs of a Militant This would end up being published back in 2013, February of 2013, and his brother helped him. Also, that same year, the Attorney General would end up seizing some of the money that Rudolph made off of this that he would owe in restitution to the state of Alabama. This book has been republished, and it's also still available through the Army of God website. I know because I checked, which is disgusting. Like I mentioned before, this has been part of the Manhunt anthology series, and Rudolph is portrayed by Jack Huston, an actor. He's a British actor. He's actually really handsome, which is really sad that he plays this really horrific man. But yeah, that, my friends, is the horrific bombing that was carried out by Eric Robert Rudolph, the domestic terrorist who would be convicted of this series of bombings. So I hope you guys learned something from this tragic event, and I will see you guys, or you'll hear me in my next one. Bye, guys.